The history of the World Cup. Intro: the world stops for one tournament. Every 4 years, the world stops. Work slows. Streets empty. Entire nations hold their breath. The FIFA World Cup is the biggest sporting event on earth. More watched than the Olympics. More emotionally charged than any league competition. But the World Cup didn't begin as a guaranteed success. It began as a gamble. A political risk. And an idea many believed would fail. This is the story of how the World Cup was born. How it survived war and controversy. And how it became football's greatest stage. Football before the World Cup, 1:30 to 3 o'clock. Before the World Cup, international football barely existed. Most matches were friendlies. Or part of the Olympic Games. The Olympics allowed football. But only for amateurs. This excluded professional players. Especially from countries where football was already a working-class profession. As football grew across Europe and South America, there was a growing belief that the sport needed its own global tournament. One man believed this more than anyone. Jules Rimet and the big idea, 3 to 4:30. That man was Jules Rimet, the president of FIFA. Rimet believed football could unite nations. Even after the devastation of World War I. In 1928, FIFA voted to create a new tournament. A World Championship. Open to professionals. Played every 4 years. It was named the World Cup. Now FIFA needed a host. The first World Cup, Uruguay 1930, for 30 to 6:30. Uruguay was chosen to host the first World Cup in 1930. They were Olympic champions. They were celebrating 100 years of independence. And they agreed to pay travel costs for teams. Even so, many European nations refused to travel. The journey took weeks by ship. Only 13 teams competed. There were no qualifiers. No group draws. No global hype. Uruguay won the final against Argentina. And football history was made. The World Cup had survived its first test. Early tournaments and growing pains, 6:30 to 8:30. The 1934 World Cup in Italy was the first with qualifiers. It was also deeply political. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini used the tournament as propaganda. Italy won, amid accusations of intimidation and corruption. In 1938, the World Cup went to France. Tensions in Europe were rising. Several teams withdrew in protest. 1 year later, World War II began. The World Cup disappeared. War, loss, and a return. The World Cup was cancelled in 1942 and 1946. Many players never returned from the war. Entire generations were lost. But in 1950, football returned. Brazil hosted the World Cup. And built the largest stadium on earth, the Maracanã. They expected victory. Instead, disaster struck. Uruguay shocked Brazil in the final match. The defeat became known as the Maracanazo. It remains one of football's greatest upsets. The rise of legends, 1950s and 60s. The World Cup now entered its golden age. In 1958, a 17-year-old named Pelé stunned the world. Brazil played with flair, freedom, and joy. They won again in 1962. In England, football came home in 1966. England won their only World Cup. In a final still debated today. The World Cup was no longer just a tournament. It was myth-making. Politics, passion, and controversy. As the World Cup grew, politics followed. In 1970, Brazil's team became immortal. Arguably the greatest side ever assembled. In 1978, Argentina hosted under a military dictatorship. Allegations of manipulation still surround the tournament. In 1986, Diego Maradona defined a World Cup. 1 goal illegal. 1 goal genius. Their hand of God and their goal of the century came minutes apart. Only football could produce moments like this. Global expansion and commercial era. By the 1990s, the World Cup was global. More teams. More sponsors. More television money. The tournament expanded to include nations from Africa, Asia, and North America. In 1998, the World Cup grew to 32 teams. France won on home soil. New stars emerged. Football was now a global business. But still deeply emotional. The modern World Cup. The 21st century brought new debates. Technology. VAR. Hosting rights. South Africa hosted the first African World Cup in 2010. Germany dominated in 2014. France triumphed again in 2018. In 2022, Qatar hosted the first Winter World Cup. Surrounded by controversy and criticism. Yet the football endured. Drama. Goals. Moments remembered forever. The future of the World Cup. The World Cup is changing again. Expanded formats. More host nations. More matches. Some fear tradition is being lost. Others believe football is simply evolving. The debate continues. Conclusion: why the World Cup matters. The World Cup matters because it belongs to everyone. It tells stories of underdogs, heroes, and heartbreak. From a risky idea in 1930 to the biggest stage in sport, the World Cup remains football's ultimate dream. And every 4 years, the world stops. All over again.